January 1944. A winter morning breaks over a prisoner of war camp in the American Southwest. The sun rises low and pale above rows of barbed wire, wooden barracks, and a dusty parade ground. Frost clings to the ground, crunching beneath boots. From somewhere beyond the wire comes a sound unfamiliar to the men inside the camp. Not artillery, not shouted orders, not the whine of aircraft, but a sharp crack, followed by cheers. A ball strikes leather, then another. The sound echoes again, steady and rhythmic, carried by dry desert air. For the Japanese prisoners watching from behind the fence, this sound feels as strange as the land itself. This moment matters because it unfolds far from the battlefields of the Pacific, yet it reveals a quieter front of the Second World War, a psychological one. By 1944, thousands of Japanese soldiers had been captured in places like Guadalcanal, Saipan, and the Aleutian Islands. Many were wounded, exhausted, or starving at the moment of capture. Trained under an ideology that equated surrender with disgrace, they expected captivity to bring humiliation, punishment, and brutality. Imperial Japanese Army doctrine had taught them that enemy hands meant dishonor, starvation, and death. What awaited them instead would quietly undermine everything they had been taught. Before capture, most Japanese soldiers imagined American camps as places of cruelty. Wartime propaganda portrayed Americans as decadent yet savage, incapable of discipline, and eager to mistreat prisoners. Stories circulated among Japanese units of POWs being executed or worked to death. Surrender itself was viewed as worse than dying in combat. Yet when these men arrived in American-run camps, the shock was immediate and profound. They received medical care. They were fed regular meals, and then, on certain afternoons, they witnessed something utterly incomprehensible: American guards and prisoners alike gathering to play baseball.
Baseball, that simple leather-bound object arcing through the air, became the recurring symbol of this experience. To the Americans, it was ordinary, almost trivial. To the Japanese POWs, it was unsettling. Here were their captors, soldiers in the midst of the most destructive war in human history, engaging in a leisurely game. No shouting of commands, no ritualized hierarchy. Officers and enlisted men stood side by side, laughing, competing, sometimes even inviting prisoners to watch more closely. Historical records confirm the presence of organized sports in many U.S. POW camps. According to U.S. Army Provost Marshal General reports, recreational activities were encouraged as part of compliance with the 1929 Geneva Convention. Camps in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and California maintained baseball diamonds, gloves, and bats. Photographs from Camp Lordsburg and Camp McCoy show games underway while prisoners look on. In some camps, Japanese POWs were eventually allowed to form their own teams, though many initially refused, uncertain whether participation would violate their code of honor. For those who watched, the contrast was stark. They had expected constant surveillance, punishment, and psychological pressure. Instead, they observed guards who trusted one another enough to turn their backs during play. They saw disputes resolved not through violence but through agreed-upon rules. An umpire's call, sometimes contested, sometimes accepted, ended arguments that, in another army, might have resulted in blows or worse. The crack of the bat became a recurring sound, a reminder that life continued beyond war. Diaries and post-war interviews reveal how deeply this affected prisoners' perceptions. In memoirs collected by Japanese historians after the war, former POWs recalled their confusion at American behavior. One former sergeant later wrote that watching baseball made him question whether the Americans truly saw war as an all-encompassing state of existence. Another recalled that the game suggested a society confident enough to allow play even during global conflict. These reflections were not immediate. They formed slowly, inning by inning, as days in captivity stretched into months. The transformation was subtle but enduring. Baseball symbolized more than recreation.
It represented a system built on rules rather than absolute authority, where outcomes were uncertain and effort mattered more than blind obedience. For men raised in a rigid hierarchy that discouraged questioning orders, this was quietly revolutionary. The idea that soldiers could pause, compete, and enjoy themselves without undermining discipline challenged the core assumptions of imperial ideology. American camp administrators understood this effect, even if imperfectly. Official memoranda note that recreation improved morale and reduced unrest. What they did not fully grasp was how these activities communicated values without words. No lectures on democracy were needed. The sight of a fair game, governed by rules accepted by all participants, spoke more clearly than any pamphlet. Not all prisoners embraced the experience. Some turned away, refusing to watch. Others reported feelings of shame, believing that observing such games made their own suffering seem trivial. Yet even among the resistant, the image lingered. The sound of the bat striking the ball returned again and again, impossible to erase. It became associated not with weakness, but with an unfamiliar strength, a confidence rooted in abundance rather than sacrifice. By the war's end, many former POWs carried these memories home to a devastated Japan. Cities lay in ruins, food was scarce, and old certainties had collapsed. In this landscape, recollections of American camps took on new meaning. Baseball, once a symbol of the enemy, became a bridge. The sport would later flourish in post-war Japan, embraced by a new generation. While this adoption had many causes, the wartime encounters planted early seeds. The epilogue of this story does not return to the camp, but to the broader arc of history. A simple game, played behind barbed wire, revealed a truth that ideology had obscured. Power can express itself through restraint, and confidence through play. The baseball, passed from hands to hand, struck and caught again and again, became a quiet messenger of a different worldview. In a war defined by destruction, it offered a glimpse of continuity, of a society that believed its values could survive even the darkest conflict. And for those who once stood watching from behind the fence, that sound carried forward, long after the war had ended, echoing into a changed world where freedom was no longer an abstraction, but a lived experience.